There is an affordability crisis that has struck the United States, and it is manifesting in the form of anxieties amongst the younger population, especially Gen Z, that they will never be able to afford a house. And therefore, I call it the homeowner crisis. But it is incorrect to assume that the homeowner crisis or the affordability crisis is solely due to economic or policy reasons, as is so often touted by the experts of our society. In all reality, my friends, the core of this crisis is not economic, it's not political, it is instead moral. And this deep moral rot manifests in the form of the erosion of the culture of ownership, which sustains civilizations at the base level and then creates the context for policy and economics to flourish, and instead replaces it with a culture of borrowing, which can do nothing more than parasitize what man needs to sustain civilization and create, as a result, bad economic and bad policy decisions. And until we, as thinking people, until we, as Americans, recognize this tension and recognize the tyranny of the culture of borrowing, we will not be able to fix the affordability crisis, because all of our attempts to fix it will be going towards symptoms and not origins. So in this video, my friend, we're going to actually examine the affordability crisis from this moral lens. I'm going to explain how the culture of ownership has been eroded, how the culture of borrowing disempowers us on a very base and moral level, and how we can fix this going forward so that civilization in America can continue to flourish, and that homeownership can be not just a dream, but an emergent reality for everyone who wishes to partake in it. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all are doing well. I am Christian. Thanks so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure this channel and this message is successful. My friends, this is a civic conservative project. If you believe the foundational philosophical character of the American experiment is worth pushing forth into this modern discourse and is worth defending with philosophical rigor and moral rigor, this is the channel for you. If you believe that America deserves a better class of defenders than what she has right now, one that do not sensationalize but they edify, they do not posture but they stand in conviction, this is the channel for you. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for supporting my dream of influencing the discourse and having a positive impact on America. Thank you guys so much. Now please enjoy the video. So there is indeed a major homeowner and or affordability crisis. And this crisis has not just affected the economic reality of being able to own a home, because as statistics have shown us that previous generations have been able to obtain homeownership much sooner than younger generations today are going to be able to. This has also triggered a shift in perception. And this shift in perception, my friends, is really what I think reveals the moral rot going on here. But just a few facts before we can lay this out so we can examine the empirical record to see this before we excavate any further. So it is evident, according to statistics, that new census data says that there is a trend of 18 to 29-year-olds living with their parents. And this trend right now is higher than it was during the Great Depression. In fact, it's at the highest point since the Great Depression. In almost 100 years, the amount of young people not going out there staking land, and owning homes has not been higher than it is now, than a period of utter economic catastrophe. And the perceptual shift that has triggered this is even more concerning. An article here says, quote, that with Gen Z increasingly saying they prefer renting to owning a home. A recent survey by a multifamily-focused property management company, Entrada, found that nearly 3 in 4 Gen Z renters view renting as a smarter option than buying. And so this is quite concerning. A lady who did this survey quoted as following, quote, what the survey told us about Gen Z is that renting is a great way of life for them. Interesting. And Entrada's industry expert, Virginia Love, told Newsweek, while homeownership is something they want at some point in life, they are sort of rewriting their own timeline. They don't feel like they need to follow the whole college, marriage, baby, house, bigger house timelines. They create whatever they want in life. And it's this mentality of total empowerment, is this mentality of a sort of primacy of desire ruling over every single part of our consideration that is precisely the problem here. Because it's not that they're being rebellious to old narratives. It's that they are impacting, they are impeding their ability to have a moral stake in the development of their country. My friends, owning property, especially owning property like a home, which is a very significant kind of property to own because it establishes you in a way that other forms of property don't necessarily do, and it also establishes you upon land that gathers equity and gathers value, which can then increase your ability to go further in the society in the first place. But that's the economic reality of homeowners. Homeowning is actually the largest manifestation of the very principle that sustains civilization, and that is the ownership of private property. It is a mistake that so many modern minds have been infected by, to believe that private property is merely the legal status of owning some kind of property that the law recognizes as being yours. That is a result of private property, but that is not the essence of private property. To understand the essence of private property, we have to look all the way back to the foundations of civilization, to the findings and emergence of civil society. Even amongst primitive men, even amongst cavemen, even amongst those who dwelled in tribes, and not even villages, but tribes, there was a sense of ownership, a sense of mine and thine, a sense of ownership that was manifested even on a very basic level, whether it be gathering bundles of firewood to create fires, whether it be creating things with your hands, taking materials, creating things with your hands, whether it be territorial claims that certain villages would have against other people. These are all marks of ownership that are crude and primitive, but they reflect a natural intuition that man has about how he can apply his will to the world. This is called the hoarding appetite. The hoarding appetite is the foundation that is within all of our hearts, because even infants and babies have a sense of what is mine and what is not mine. I mean, for example, the whole phrase, you're taking candy from a baby. Try giving a baby like a rattle or a candy bar and taking it from them. They will get mad. That's the sort of intuitive, sort of moral sense of what it means to have something. And this is where property begins. Then when civil society develops, this hoarding appetite becomes translated into the acquisition of actual things that go beyond, our sense of intuition. The acquisition of land, of property, the mixing of land, of labor with lands, cultivating land. And then this becomes eventually the legal idea of what we have of private property right now. But it begins on the natural level. It begins on the moral level, and it goes up from there. But not only that, private property does not simply allow us to own something externally. It allows us, especially if we believe in this hoarding appetite, this intuitive sense, to govern ourselves internally. Having a sense of ownership in yourself, and then that arising to have an external effect, is what basically allows you to enter into society in the first place. Man enters into society, and he enters into mutual intercourse with social intercourse with other people, because his needs need to be met, and also he needs to be able to satisfy his social instinct, which is called his sociability. But if he has no basis upon which to stake a claim in those social relationships, he cannot exist in society. When we have a sense of ownership within ourselves, that is our first claim. And the second claim is going to be the claims that arise from our duties. In a society where we have no sense of ownership, it becomes impossible to perform our moral duties towards other people. It becomes impossible to be just, because upon which basis is my being just staked in? If it's not staked in the knowledge and the understanding that I have a kind of self-governance over myself, I'm able to regulate my passions, I'm able to understand the readings of my conscience, I'm able to adjust my conduct better to fit what is correct. If I don't have that, I don't have duty, and society becomes impossible. So private property sustains civilization because it grounds us and allows us to be established into the substance of moral action. And thus, the culture of ownership arises from this, because you have to understand that these habits and these behaviors don't simply exist in isolation. We don't just create for the sake of creating. When we create, other things are created because of that as well. So the culture of ownership does actually four morally significant things. It trains you in moral refinement. It trains the person that owns something in moral refinement. If I have the ability to self-govern myself, I can then of course, again, accord my behavior to sound principles. I can then, of course, subdue my passions. I can then, of course, work on character formation by also having sound conduct. It trains me in moral refinement. It trains me in responsibility. If I own something, then that means I am responsible for it. If I govern myself, I'm responsible for self-governance. If I own a piece of land, I'm responsible for maintaining the land, cultivating the land, defending the land against aggressors. I have now a sense of responsibility, which further refines my actions, draws me closer to the natural world, and allows me to have a broader moral imagination where I can continue to imagine and understand the different possibilities of possibly fulfilling my social duties. And in this sense, it grounds me. I'm not pie in the sky somewhere being taken away by wild flights of imagination. No, I am rooted and grounded in what is real, and that being rooted and grounded in what is real gives me the foundation to act in the society. And most importantly, it tests the creativity and enables self-preservation. Again, if man can't govern himself, he cannot be stable. But if man can't preserve himself, he can't even govern himself, because self-preservation is the precedent, is the antecedent to self-governance, because I have to be alive in order to govern myself. So if I'm able to preserve myself, again, by way of defense that I particularly own, and I'm able to use my creativity to cultivate that land, to use that land to create, whether it be building a home or something else, then again, I'm going to be tapped in with my moral faculties. This is what the culture of ownership does. It enables us to be morally responsible beings, to refine ourselves, to test our creativity, to test our wills, and overall to be better fitted for society, which is why it's so important for man. And capitalism is actually the natural result of this. Now, a lot of people are blaming this homeowner crisis on capitalism. They're blaming it on the big corporations going in and buying up homes and then making them renting homes. And of course, that is a problem. But this is not the problem of capitalism. If we understand what capitalism is, capitalism defines simply a voluntary system of exchange of value between two or more consenting parties. Now, that's the economic definition of capitalism. But the moral definition of capitalism is actually a little bit more significant, because value is not simply monetary. It's not simply economic. Value is also moral, and it's also intangible. And also, it's influenced by a bunch of other things. Because we understand the law of opposing principles tells us that no one thing, no one principle, no one value exists in a vacuum. So where there is values, there is a context which informs those values. And whereas there's the context that informs those values, there is a foundation from which those values arise. So capitalism really is just the manifestation of moral values on the economic realm, but beneath that, there is a moral foundation there as well. And so what influences our moral values? What influences our more intangible values that simply is an extension of our taste towards particular things that we happen to fancy? What influences all of that? Very simply, our passions, number one, can influence some of those more intangible values, things that we love or have an attachment to, that may then translate into economic action, or our conscience. If our conscience does it, that means that those values are refined within the context of our moral duties. In other words, all moral values are bound by the exact context that society requires to arise. People say that capitalism needs virtue. That's true. But what sustains virtue, my friends? What makes virtue possible in the first place? If you had no society, there would be no playground. There would be no place to actually act out virtue. Therefore, in order to have virtue, I must have a society that is just and well ordered, because there are several principles on the ground level that keep society up. There is justice, the abstinence of harming people and their things and possessions, following your covenants and your contracts and your promises, and then the culture that emerges from justice, which encourages us to do things that are generous, encourages us to do things that enhance the character of society and make it so that just behavior can continue. There's fidelity, that loyalty between two or more people within society that is the antecedent, that is the precursor for every stable social relationship. Without fidelity, I can't act because I have no guarantee that my actions will not be met with uncharitability. I have no guarantee. I can't even use a bank. I can't even drive a car, because there is no guarantee that those things will even do what they say they're going to do. There's veracity. Without truth, with veracity, which is the pursuit of truth, I can't really even trust anything around me. I don't even know what is true. I can't even understand virtue or morality. These are the principles that society requires and that enable virtue to happen, because without them, virtue can't be enacted. So, where do these principles, how do these principles get worked out? They get worked out through our moral imaginations. The moral imagination is that sort of sense of imagination that allows you to explore the many different avenues and possibilities of pursuing virtue and pursuing your moral duties. So in other words, capitalism, my friends, is merely an extension of the moral imagination, moving in a straight line from the moral into the civic, manifesting in the form of our habits, our economic habits, and then manifesting in the form of a system created after those economic habits. Capitalism is merely the creative extension of our moral imaginations. Because there are three sections of civilization. There's the moral, there's the civic, and then the political. The civic is where the institutions are. The moral is where our duties are worked out. And the political is where the government is. Capitalism begins in the moral and comes to the civic. Well, here's the problem with this. And here's how it ties back to the homeowner crisis and the culture of borrowing. The culture of borrowing actually undermines the moral imagination. And by undermining the moral imagination, the culture of borrowing actually chips away at the foundations of civilization. It creates a pale imitation of capitalism that bears all of its characteristics, but has none of its moral substance. And then it creates a society where we are parasitically used as sort of cogs in the machine when it comes to issues of economics and home ownership. Borrowing and lending, and when they are a foundation of a culture, they corrupt the moral imagination, particularly by detaching the borrower from fidelity, particularly detaching the borrower from the specific circumstances that lead to us being connected to our creditors, to our lenders, and to those whom we are owed. The important relationship between a debtor and a creditor is not the fact that the debtor owes the creditor, it's the fact that we should have a certain respect and a certain fidelity to the fact that we owe the creditor. But when borrowing becomes so widespread, when it becomes second nature, and it becomes not a goal towards a particular end, but a goal towards to sustain a particular moment, then we get the degradation of fidelity. And with that, we get the corruption of the moral imagination. Let me explain this in very specific terms. Mortgages, as it relates to the homeowner crisis, as it relates to homeowning, have actually been corrupted by the culture of borrowing. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a mortgage. Having a mortgage, in fact, is actually financially smart with some people, for a lot of people, actually. However, if we were to look at the history of mortgages, in the early 1900s, most Americans didn't have a mortgage. And those that did actually, before they were going to get it, they would have to actually have a 50% down payment, number one. And number two, the terms were like something like 5 years or 6 years. Very, very, very small terms. So that means that the end of obtaining full homeownership was right in the near view of the owner. It wasn't some far off thing. Then as time went on and the government wanted to incentivize homeownership in the 30s and 40s, and they passed certain bills to do that. And then as more mortgages sponsored by the government came into the market, more people began owning homes, yes, but they did so for like 20, 30-year terms, which meant that some people could buy a home in their mid-40s, and then by the time that 30 years is up, they will either be dead, or their children would inherit, or something like that, or their children would inherit the mortgage. So in other words, homeownership became more distant, but the particular moment of having the home, even though it's not wholly yours, that became present, and people were sustained off of that moment. In the culture of borrowing, unfortunately, by having these very, very long terms, by incentivizing the moment of having the home, not owning it, but the moment of having it in that particular moment, by doing that, the culture of borrowing eroded the sense of connection that a lot of people had between their creditors. It also eroded the sense of connection that people have with the finality of home ownership. And this is the problem, my friend. Mortgages can be fine if the culture of ownership is prioritized, but in the culture of borrowing, they're a ticking time bomb, because especially when they are subsidized and they are backed up with like subprime mortgages, which is what caused the 2008 housing collapse, which caused a lot of people who had that temporary moment of homeownership to lose their homes. That temporary moment of having the home that you didn't actually own because you have a mortgage, because that mortgage was backed up in a wrong way, because that person didn't have the financial virtue to pay, or the financial virtue that would lead them to be able to own and maintain, that caused them a lot of pain, and a lot of folks went homeless during the 2008 crash. The truth is this, my friends, ownership does not simply require license. It does not simply require someone to give you something, like give you a mortgage. Ownership requires financial virtue. And if someone's financial virtue allows them to maintain and own a home, that is good. But if someone is not financially virtuous, if they do not know how to spend right, to save right, to invest right, if they do not know the value of their money or how to use their money in ways that are going to be good for themselves and their posterity, nothing, no mortgage, no loan, no nothing, no borrowing is going to actually allow them to keep what they've gotten. The culture of ownership says, not only do you have a stake in what you have to keep it, you have to maintain it, you have to cultivate it to be bigger than a single moment. But when you have this culture of borrowing that degrades our connection with our creditors, that degrades our fidelity, that becomes much more. And therefore, ownership becomes not really a moral thing. It becomes more of a material thing, more of a I have to pay this bill kind of thing. We have cheapened the importance of property ownership, because we have cheapened the importance of our moral duties, and we've cheapened the importance of our connections, which erodes the self-governance that keeps man's proper sense of property alive. And that, my friends, is one of the reasons I think this perceptual shift within Gen Z, because I'm myself at 25, I would like to own a home one day. I don't want to rent the rest of my life, but this perceptual shift within Gen Z is so dangerous because it continues that erosion of that sense of self-ownership, which translates into outward property ownership. So it's moral ignorance that is our culprit here, my friends. We have to have a culture where property is talked about as much in moral and human terms, anthropological terms, as it is in economic terms, number one. That would go a long way in fixing this. And we also have to have a culture where the idea of the mortgage is not extended beyond what a culture of ownership would permit. Having a 30-year mortgage, so there's even been ideas of having a 50-year mortgage floated by some people. These are ridiculous because it further erodes the culture of ownership by making finality of ownership a distant prospect. Having a culture where, again, financial virtue is emphasized and mortgages with like reasonable terms, like we used to have, mortgages where you can actually have a chance of owning your home in your lifetime, that would put a stake, a fine stake of the owner into actually obtaining that, and then that would cultivate habits that lead to that. But so long as we exist in this culture of free money, of loans, of borrowing, of lending, which is emphasized by an egalitarian ethic that says that those that have less because of some injustice, and therefore that needs to be ameliorated by some kind of handout, until we fix that culture, then I'm sorry, my friends, the homeowner crisis will continue. The cynicism amongst my generation will continue, and people will not know what to do except to scream at the sky and to shake their heads. But the truth is this: America was built off the culture of ownership. America was built off of a sustained understanding of what it meant to own yourself and then own something that's an extension of that. And if we were to resurrect that, my friends, not only would that empower people at the ground level, because your property ownership is not just about something outside of you, it's about you fundamentally in your internal world. That would then give people the moral imagination to go ahead and seek something more than constantly renting. Renting is not bad because it puts you under the influence of somebody else. We live in a society, my friends, we're always under somebody else's influence. Renting, when it is taken to be a lifelong thing, is bad because it erodes the connection between the individual and the principle that sustains civilization. And that is why, my friends, this moment could not be any more important. And that is why, my friends, we must all call out the sinister moral rot that lies at the bottom of this housing crisis, of this homeowner affordability crisis. And then the economic prescriptions and everything else will follow from that, I believe. But if we just adjust the economic problems, then you can have a perfect economy. But if you don't have a culture of people that actually value the moral worth behind property, I'm sorry, that perfect economy will not sustain a virtuous culture of ownership. We need a strong culture of ownership, and that is what I believe will fix this problem. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to ensure the channel is successful. My friends, study history, study philosophy. If the ideas you heard in this video encouraged you, then I would encourage you, please, be sure to join the Pensive cohort, which is my collection of young thinkers who are going to study philosophy, study the philosophies of the American founding, and those who came before the American founding who influenced us and pushed them in the public discourse. We're doing it as we speak. Join our Discord for that. My friends, study history, study philosophy. Remember what to victim. Please stay pensive. Bye, guys.